They told me he felt comfortable with me. It was supposed to be a compliment, a sign of trust from an important client, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of feeling trapped. It was the sound of a door locking behind me. My name is Linda Parker. I'm 46, and for the last 12 years I've worked as a maid at the Grand Majestic Hotel. It's a good job, a steady job. I need steady. I have rent to pay, bills that come every month without fail. My son is trying to get through community college, and I help him with what I can. You don't take risks when people are depending on you. So I learned to be good at my job by being invisible. I keep my head down. I do my work. I don't make waves. I'm reliable, quiet, and very, very careful. In a place like the Grand Majestic, that's what they want. The hotel is its own little world. It has written rules, and it has unwritten ones. The most important unwritten rule is that certain guests are more important than anyone else. The ones who stay for months in the best suites. The ones who spend more in a week than I make in a year. Management calls them high-value clients. We just called them the permanents. These guests get what they want, no questions asked, and the staff, we are expected to be flexible. We are expected to adapt. We are expected to be discreet. Our job isn't just to clean. It's to make sure the world of the guest is never, ever disturbed. I was good at that. I took pride in being a ghost who left behind a perfect room. Mr. Edward Collins was one of those guests, an important one. He was in the penthouse suite, and he'd been there for almost a year. Everyone on staff knew who he was. His name was always spoken with a certain kind of respect. Or maybe it was fear. I had cleaned his suite a few times before, just as part of the normal housekeeping rotation. It was just another room on my list, a very large, very clean room, but a room nonetheless. I didn't think anything of it. I did my job the way I always did. I followed my system. I was efficient, I was quiet, and I never lingered. I didn't look at personal papers. I didn't touch things that weren't part of my cleaning duties. I followed my training to the letter. Then one afternoon, my supervisor, Maria, called me into the housekeeping office. That was unusual. I was never called into the office. My work was good. I never had complaints. My stomach immediately tightened. I thought I must have done something wrong. My mind started racing, replaying my entire shift. Did I forget to empty a trash can? Did I leave a cloth behind? Did I break something and not notice? Losing this job was not an option. It just wasn't. The thought alone made it hard to breathe. That Maria was at her desk, looking at a schedule sheet. She told me to sit down. She had a strange sort of smile on her face. She told me not to worry, that I wasn't in any trouble. She said it was actually good news. A compliment, she called it. She explained that Mr. Collins had made a special request to management. He had requested me, specifically. He wanted me to be the only person assigned to clean his suite from now on. And then she said it. The word that would change everything. She told me the reason for the request was that he felt comfortable with me. She said he told management he appreciated my professionalism, my quiet nature, my discretion. Management was thrilled. They saw it as a sign of excellent service, a success story. They told Maria it was a testament to my hard work and the hotel's high standards. I just sat there, listening. I didn't know what to say. A small part of me felt a flicker of pride. My work had been noticed. An important person thought I did a good job, but a much larger part of me felt a deep, cold sense of dread. It was a feeling I couldn't name, but it was heavy. It felt like being singled out under a spotlight I didn't want. I was not asked if I wanted this assignment. I was not asked if I was comfortable with it. I was told it was happening. It was presented to me as an honor, a reward for my good work. But it didn't feel like a reward. It felt like a command. There was no option to say no. Refusing a special request from Mr. Collins was unthinkable. It would have been seen as insubordination. As not being a team player, it would have put a target on my back. So I just nodded. My schedule was changed the very next day. All my other rooms on the 7th and 8th floors were reassigned. My entire shift was now dedicated to one suite, the penthouse. My job was now Mr. Collins. The first week or so, it was fine. Or I told myself it was fine. He was usually gone when I arrived in the morning. The suite was enormous and silent. It took me hours to clean it to the standard I knew was expected. I just put my head down and focused on the work. Wiping down surfaces, changing the linens, running the vacuum, the familiar rhythm of the work was calming. I tried to push that feeling of dread away. I told myself this was a good thing. A simpler day, less running up and down the hallways, pushing my heavy cart. But the feeling lingered. It was the feeling of being watched, even when the room was empty. The feeling of being chosen for a reason I didn't fully understand. The word comfortable echoed in my mind. What did it really mean? Then things started to change. In small, almost unnoticeable ways. He started being in the suite when I arrived. At first, it was just occasionally. Then it became more frequent. Soon, it was every day. He would be sitting in one of the armchairs in the living area, sometimes reading a newspaper, sometimes on his laptop. He rarely spoke to me beyond a brief nod when I entered, but his presence changed the entire atmosphere of the room. The silence was different now. It was heavy, it was tense. It made it hard to work. It made it hard to breathe normally. I felt like an intruder in his space. Even though I was supposed to be there, I tried to become even more invisible. I moved faster, made less noise. I tried to clean around him as if he were a piece of furniture. My only goal was to finish my work and get out of that suite. But he was always there. It started to feel like he was waiting for me, like he was arranging his schedule to make sure he was there during my cleaning time. It was a strange, unnerving thought, and I tried to dismiss it as my imagination. After a couple of weeks of this, I decided to mention it to Maria. I was very careful about how I worded it. I didn't complain. I knew better than to complain. I just mentioned, casually, that it was sometimes a little awkward to clean properly with the guest present in the room. I framed it as a concern about the quality of my work. Maria just gave me a patient, knowing smile. She told me that Mr. Collins was a very important man and his schedule was his own. Then she reminded me again. He feels comfortable with you, Linda. That's why he doesn't feel the need to leave. She told me to see it as a sign of trust, a compliment to my professionalism. She was reframing my discomfort as his compliment. I understood the real message perfectly. Do not cause a problem. Do not make the guest feel awkward. His comfort is the priority. Your feelings are irrelevant, so I never mentioned it again. I just adapted. I had to. I learned to work around him. I would start in the master bedroom if he was in the living area. I would clean the guest bathrooms while he was on a phone call. I created a new routine designed to minimize any interaction, any proximity. I became an expert at navigating his space without ever crossing his path. But the effort was exhausting. The mental strain of being constantly aware of him, of his presence, was more tiring than any of the physical labor. Every day, entering that suite felt like walking onto a stage. And I didn't know my lines. I didn't even know the play. All I knew was that I was being watched. And that the word comfortable didn't mean what I thought it meant. It meant his comfort, not mine. The conversation was over. There was nothing else to say. Maria's smile had been a perfectly painted wall, and I had just run right into it. I walked out of her small windowless office, and the smell of industrial cleaner and stale air conditioning followed me down the hall. Her words echoed in my head, each one a small smooth stone dropped into a deep well. A sign of trust. He's an important man. His comfort is our priority. My comfort didn't matter. That was the part she didn't say. It wasn't on the list of priorities. It wasn't even on the paper the list was written on. I was staff. My job was to provide comfort, not to feel it. That word again. Comfortable. It had been a nice word once. It meant a soft chair after a long day. It meant having enough to pay the bills that come, regular as the tide. It meant my son, David, not having to worry while he was at community college. Now the word felt sharp. It felt like a command. It was the sound of a door locking behind me. The rest of the day was a blur of standard rooms. I scrubbed tubs and changed sheets, my hands moving on their own. My mind was miles away, up on the top floor, in the penthouse, with him. Each time I pushed my cart into an empty room, a wave of relief washed over me. The beautiful, simple emptiness of it. No one watching. No one sitting in a leather chair, silent and still as a statue. In those rooms, I could be invisible again. I could just be a pair of hands doing a job, a good job. But the relief was temporary. It was like holding my breath underwater. I knew I had to come up for air eventually, and the air was in his suite. The next morning, I felt a dread in my stomach before I even put on my uniform. It was a cold, heavy knot. I clocked in, nodded to the other maids, and avoided looking at Maria. I didn't want to see her cheerful, professional face. I didn't want her to ask me how I was doing. I just wanted to get my cart and disappear. Yet my cart felt heavier than usual. The fresh linens, the tiny bottles of shampoo, the vacuum cleaner, it all felt like an anchor pulling me toward the place I didn't want to go. The elevator ride up was the worst part. The numbers lit up one by one, climbing higher. Each floor we passed was a floor where people live normal lives, where maids clean empty rooms. My ride didn't stop until the very top. The doors opened directly onto the private foyer of the penthouse. It was my stop, the only stop. I took a deep breath, the kind you take before you do something you have to do but don't want to. I swiped the key card. The light blinked green. I pushed the door open and announced myself, the way we were trained to. Housekeeping. My voice sounded small in the vast, quiet space. The silence that answered was familiar. It was a silence, heavy, expectant. He was there. Of course he was there. He sat in the same dark gray armchair by the vast window overlooking the city. He wore a simple dark sweater and trousers. He wasn't reading. He wasn't on his phone. He was just sitting, his hands resting on the arms of the chair, his gaze fixed on the skyline. He didn't turn when I came in. He never did. But I felt his awareness of me. It was like a change in the air pressure. I started my routine, the same one I had developed to cope. Kitchen first. It was the farthest point from that chair. I ran the water in the sink, the sound of welcome noise in the suffocating quiet. I wiped down the marble countertops, my movements quick and efficient. I emptied the small trash bin, a few papers, a receipt from some expensive store. Nothing personal. Entering that suite felt like walking onto a stage where I was the only actor, and the audience was one man who never clapped, never spoke, never moved. I was hyper-aware of everything. The soft squeak of my rubber-soled shoes on the hardwood floor, the click of a cabinet door, the rustle of the new trash bag. Every sound was an intrusion. My intrusion. After the kitchen, I moved to the living area. This was the hard part. This was where I had to get closer to him. I started dusting the bookshelves on the far wall. My back to him, I could feel his stillness behind me. It was an active stillness, not a passive one. It was the stillness of a predator, waiting. I kept my eyes down, focused on the dark wood, on the spines of the books. I tried to make myself smaller, to take up less space, to make less noise. I wanted to be a ghost, a machine. But I was a person, and my heart was hammering against my ribs. I moved to the coffee table. It was a huge slab of polished wood. Usually it was empty, save for a few magazines fanned out just so. Today, there was something different, a book. It was a thick hardcover book bound in dark blue leather. It was lying open, not just open, but placed deliberately, face down, as if someone had just set it there and meant to come right back. It was in the very center of the table, directly in my path. I stopped. I had to dust that table. It was part of my job. To dust it, I would have to move the book. I would have to touch it. My stomach immediately tightened. This was new, a change in the script. All the other days, everything was exactly the same. The stillness, the silence, the routine. My routine. His routine. But this book was a deviation. I glanced at him. He hadn't moved. He was in the exact same position, staring out the window. Was it a test? Was he waiting to see what I would do? The thought made my skin prickle. It would have put a target on my back to ignore a dusty table. It would be a failure in my duties, the one thing they valued me for. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the book. The leather felt smooth and cool. It was heavy. I picked it up, intending to set it aside, dust the table, and put it right back. But as I lifted it, my eyes caught the title on the spine in gold letters. The Stranger. I didn't know the book, but the title sent a chill through me. I was the stranger here. I was the one who didn't belong. My pulse quickened. My curiosity, a stupid and dangerous thing, got the better of me. I turned the book over in my hands. It was open to a page near the middle. There was no bookmark, just the open page. A single paragraph had been underlined in fine black ink. My eyes scanned the words. I felt that I had been happy and that I was happy again. For everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone, I had only to wish that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate. The words didn't make sense, not fully, but the feeling they gave me was immediate and clear. A feeling of being watched, of a performance, of a strange, lonely end. I felt a wave of nausea. I snapped the book shut. The sound was like a gunshot in this silent room. I flinched, my head jerking up to look at him, at the man in the chair. He was looking at me, his head was turned just slightly. His eyes, which I had never truly seen before, were fixed on me. They were dark and unreadable. There was no expression on his face, no anger, no curiosity, nothing. Just the unnerving, blank stare. He had been watching me the whole time. Time stopped. My breath caught in my chest. I was holding the book, his book. I had been caught. Caught doing what? Reading his things? Prying? I didn't know the charge, but I felt the guilt. It was maybe 2 seconds. 3 at the most. Then, as slowly as he had turned, he looked away. Back toward the window, as if I wasn't there. As if nothing had happened. But something had happened. A line had been crossed, or maybe a line had been drawn. My hands were shaking now, really shaking. I placed the book back on the table, exactly where I'd found it, face down, open to the same page. I grabbed my dust cloth and wiped the table around it, my movements jerky and clumsy. I had to get out. I had to get out of the room. I finished the rest of the suite in a panicked haze. I vacuumed, barely registering the roar of the machine. I cleaned the master bathroom, scrubbing surfaces I had already scrubbed. I just needed to keep my hands busy. I didn't look toward the living room again. I didn't want to know if he was still watching. I could feel his gaze on my back like a physical weight. When I was done, I gathered my supplies and pushed my cart toward the door. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say anything. I just pulled the door closed behind me, and the soft click of the latch felt final. It felt like an escape. But as I stood alone in the foyer, waiting for the elevator, I knew it wasn't an escape. It was just a temporary reprieve. The hotel, the whole building suddenly felt different. The opulent hallways felt narrow. The high ceilings felt low. The entire Grand Majestic felt like a suite, a quiet, elegant trap. And tomorrow, I would have to go back. My blood went cold. Not a slow chill, but a hard, sudden freeze, like plunging my hand into a bucket of ice. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. His eyes were on me, not just looking in my direction, but on me, seeing me. For the first time, I was not part of the furniture. I was the focus. The stare lasted only a few seconds. It felt like an hour. His expression was blank. No anger, no smile, nothing. Just a flat, bottomless gaze that pinned me to the spot. It was the look of a scientist observing a specimen, waiting to see what it would do. And then, just as calmly as he had looked up, he looked down again, back at the polished surface of the coffee table, as if I had ceased to exist. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He knows. He knows you read it. He wanted you to. The thought wasn't a guess, it was a certainty. A cold, hard fact dropped into the center of my mind. This wasn't an accident. The book, the page, the underlined sentence. It was a message I had to move. My training, years of it, screamed at me. Do not engage. Finish your work. Be invisible. But the invisibility was gone. He had burned it away with that single look. Still, I forced my limbs to obey. My hand, trembling, placed the book back on the table, exactly where I'd found it. My fingers fumbled, nudging it a fraction of an inch to the left, then back to the right. My breath was shallow, loud in the crushing silence of the suite. The silence. It used to be a neutral thing, just the absence of noise. Now it was heavy. It was an active presence, thick with what he wasn't saying. Every quiet tick of the grandfather clock in the hall felt like a judgment. I backed away from the table. I grabbed my cleaning rag from the cart, the damp cloth a small real thing in my shaking hand. I turned to the windows, the vast panes of glass overlooking the city. I started wiping. My motions were stiff, automatic. I wasn't cleaning. I was performing the act of cleaning. It felt like walking onto a stage. I could feel his gaze on my back, even if he wasn't looking. The whole room was his eye. I worked my way through the rest of the suite on autopilot. I dusted surfaces that were already clean. I straightened cushions that were already perfect. My mind was a loop of images, the underlined words, his flat stare, the sheer unnerving stillness of him. A visitor from another world. What did it mean? Was he the visitor, or was I? The passage was about an execution, a public spectacle. It would have put a target on my back. The thought made my stomach clench. Finishing the bedroom was the worst. It was the most private space, and my presence there now felt like a profound violation. His scent, a faint, clean smell of soap and expensive cologne, hung in the air. It felt like I was breathing him in. I made the bed with sharp, jerky movements, my hands pulling the sheets so tight the corners were like razors. I just wanted out. I needed out. Finally, it was done. I pushed my cart toward the door, my rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. It was the longest walk of my life. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on the ornate brass handle of the door. My hand reached for it, my keycard buzzed against the lock. The light turned green. I pulled the door open and slipped out, pulling it shut behind me. The soft, solid click of the latch was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a door locking behind me. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the hallway wall, my eyes squeezed shut. I was free. But the feeling didn't last. The trap wasn't the room. The trap was the job. I had to come back tomorrow. The walk back to the service elevator felt different. The gilded hallways, the quiet luxury, it all seemed like a facade, a thin veneer over something rotten. I saw another maid, Rosa, down the hall. She gave me a small, tired smile. "Long day?" she asked, her voice soft. "The usual," I lied. My own voice sounded strange, thin. She nodded, understanding what she thought was just the weariness of the job, and continued on her way. The moment of connection was gone. I was alone with this. How could I explain it? The important man in the penthouse is playing a game with me. He left a book for me to find. He stared at me. It sounded like madness. It sounded like I was making it up, like I was looking for attention. Maria's voice echoed in my head. "A sign of trust, Linda. Don't make it a problem. Telling anyone would be a problem. It would be the end of my good, steady job." That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the shadows on my ceiling, and saw his face, his empty eyes. I thought about my son, sleeping in the next room. I thought about the rent, the bills that come and keep coming. These were the bars of my cage. Mr. Collins didn't have to hold me there. My own life did that for him. He knew it too. That was part of his power. He knew I couldn't just walk away. The next morning, dread was a physical weight on my shoulders. Getting dressed for work felt like putting on a costume for a part I didn't want to play. Every step toward the hotel was a step toward him. When I got my assignment sheet, my hands were slick with sweat. There it was, penthouse suite, Mr. Collins, of course. Nothing had changed. Maria saw me looking at it. She walked over, her face set in its usual no-nonsense expression. "Everything all right, Linda?" I just nodded. What else could I do? "Good," she said, giving my shoulder a firm, patronizing pat. "He's an important guest. Management is very pleased. They said he feels comfortable with you." That word, comfortable, it was a command, a threat, a cage. It meant his comfort was the only thing that mattered. It meant my discomfort was irrelevant. It meant I had to go back up there and pretend that nothing happened. The elevator ride to the penthouse floor was an ascent into fear. My stomach churned. My throat was dry. I kept telling myself to be calm. Maybe he wouldn't be there. Maybe yesterday was a one-time thing, a single bizarre impulse. I stood before the door, the same door I had fled from yesterday. I took a deep breath that did nothing to calm me. I raised the keycard. The lock buzzed. The light turned green. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The suite was silent. The air was still. I scanned the living area, my eyes immediately going to the glass coffee table. The book was gone. For a second, a wave of relief washed over me. It was over. I had imagined it. It was a strange dream, but then I saw it. In the exact center of the table, where the book had been, sat a single flower in a slender crystal vase. It was an orchid, a perfect white orchid, its petals impossibly pristine. like sculpted wax. It hadn't been there yesterday. There were no other flowers in the suite. Just this one, alone. It was beautiful, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. It wasn't a peace offering. It wasn't an apology. It was a statement. I was here. I changed things. I am in control. He had removed the evidence of his threat and replaced it with this, something elegant, silent, and loaded with unspoken meaning. A gift that felt like a collar. I stared at it, unable to move. The book had been a test. The stare had been a confirmation. This was the beginning of the next stage of the game. A game I was being forced to play, where he made all the rules and I didn't even know the objective. All I knew was that I was losing. The orchid sat on the polished mahogany of the desk. One perfect white flower. It wasn't in a vase, it was just lying there, its stem cut short, its petals waxy and flawless. It looked cold, like something carved from bone. I stood in the doorway of the study for a long time, my cleaning cart waiting behind me in the hall. The book was gone. In its place was this, a statement. I knew it wasn't a gift. Gifts are meant to bring joy. This brought a knot of ice to the pit of my stomach. A gift is a kindness. This was a message. I saw you. I know you understood. I thought about throwing it away, just picking it up with a gloved hand, burying it at the bottom of the trash liner and wheeling it out of his life. But I couldn't. He would know. Of course he would know. He had placed it there for me to see, and he would expect to see it gone. But not in the trash. He would check. The thought was immediate and certain. This was a man who checked. So I left it. I cleaned the entire suite around that single white flower. I dusted the bookshelves, vacuumed the vast empty floors, and polished surfaces that already gleamed. But my eyes kept flicking back to it. The orchid on the desk, it was like an eye, open and unblinking. It was a piece of him left behind to watch me, to make sure I was still performing, still quiet, still good. The silence in the suite was different now. It used to be a peaceful, empty silence, the kind I liked. The sound of a room waiting to be cleaned. Now it felt heavy. It was the silence of a held breath. The silence of a stage after the actor has left, but before the audience is allowed to leave. I was the audience. I was the stagehand. I was trapped in the theater. That afternoon, I knew I had to try again. I couldn't keep this inside me. It was growing, a poison vine wrapping around my ribs. I found Maria in the bustling linen closet on the 3rd floor, directing 2 new hires. She was sharp and efficient, her voice a series of clipped commands. I waited until the new girls had left, their arms full of folded towels. Maria. She turned, a pen tucked behind her ear. Linda, everything good with the penthouse? She smiled, but it was the automatic professional smile she gave everyone. It's fine, I started, my own voice sounding weak. It's just, Mr. Collins, he's leaving things. Her brow furrowed slightly. Leaving things. Messy. I thought the whole point was that he's neat. No, not messy. Deliberate. The word sounded strange when I said it out loud. He left a book out one day, and today there was an orchid on his desk. Maria's expression cleared. The professional smile returned wider this time. An orchid? Linda, that's lovely, see? He's showing his appreciation for your hard work. That's a compliment. I don't think it was a compliment, I said, the words barely a whisper. The book? There was a passage underlined. It was unsettling. She picked up a clipboard and made a note, her focus already moving on. He's an important man, Linda. An eccentric man, maybe. Rich people are different. You can't take everything so personally. An orchid is a nice gesture. Maria, it feels like a game. It feels like he's watching me. She finally put the clipboard down and looked at me. Her smile was gone. Her face was hard, the face of a manager, not a coworker. Listen to me, Linda. Mr. Collins is the hotel's most important client. He is a high-value, long-term guest. Management is very happy with the current arrangement. She took a step closer. Her voice dropped. He feels comfortable with you. That was the word he used. Comfortable. That is the only thing that matters. Our job is to maintain that. Do you understand me? We do nothing, and you do nothing to make him feel anything other than perfectly comfortable. It was the sound of a door locking behind me. She wasn't just dismissing me. She was giving me an order. She was giving me a threat. Don't cause problems. Don't make him uncomfortable. It would put a target on my back. My discomfort didn't matter. My fear was a liability. "Yes, Maria," I said. My voice was flat, empty. "I understand." She nodded, satisfied. "Good. Just keep doing your job. Your good, quiet job." Quiet, invisible, comfortable. The words were a cage. That night, I went home and the exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't from the work. It was from the thinking. The constant circling anxiety. I sat at my small kitchen table and saw the letter from my son's university lying on the counter. The next tuition payment was due in a month. It was a big number, a number that required this job, this steady, well-paying job at the Grand Majestic. I thought of Michael, his face on the grainy video call from last week, excited about his computer science project. He was building a future I was paying for, one polished table and sanitized bathroom at a time. I couldn't quit. Quitting wasn't an option. The bills that come, they don't care if you're scared. Rent to pay, food to buy, a son to support. I had to go back. I had to walk back into that suite tomorrow, and the day after that, I had to be quiet. I had to be good. The next morning, I pushed my cart onto the private elevator, the familiar dread, a cold weight in my chest. When the doors opened into the penthouse foyer, the silence rushed out to meet me. I stepped inside. The orchid was still on the desk in the study, a pale white scar against the dark wood. I ignored it and moved into the main living area. And then I saw it. On a side table near the vast windows stood a marble chessboard. It was a permanent fixture, a piece of decor I usually just dusted. The pieces were always arranged in their starting positions, a silent, unplayed game. But not today. Today, one piece had been moved. On his side of the board, a single black pawn had been pushed forward 2 spaces, e2 to e4. The king's pawn opening. I stopped. My mop handle slipped in my sweaty glove. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a casual move made by someone thinking out loud. It was precise. It was the most common, most aggressive opening move in chess. A declaration, a challenge, your move. I stared at the board. The rest of the enormous room seemed to fade away. There was only the checkered battlefield, the silent armies of carved marble, and that one lone pawn standing exposed in the center. He was gone. There was no one here but me, but he was screaming at me from across the board. My mind raced. What did I do? I could leave it. Pretend I hadn't noticed. That was the safe option. The invisible option. But he would know I'd seen it. Not noticing wasn't possible. Leaving it would be a response in itself. A refusal to play, a sign of fear. I could move the pawn back, put it in its starting square, restore the order of the room. That was my job, wasn't it? To put things back where they belong, to erase any trace of disruption. But that was also a move. It was an answer. It was saying, Xiaosan, I will not play your game. A tremor started in my hand. I thought of Maria's warning. Don't do anything. I thought of the tuition bill. Don't lose this job. I thought of the passage in the book, the man alone before the crowd. Then I thought of his blank, empty eyes watching me. And something inside me hardened. It wasn't courage. It was a cold, quiet fury. The fury of a cornered animal. My hand moved. It felt slow, disconnected from my body. My fingers, still in the thin latex glove, closed around the cool, smooth marble of one of my own pieces, the white pawn in front of my king. I lifted it. The weight was small, but it felt immense. With a trembling, deliberate motion, I placed it 2 squares forward, meeting his pawn in the center of the board. E7 to E5, I had answered. My hand recoiled as if burned. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, staring at the 2 pawns facing each other. A silent confrontation. I had made a move. I had entered the game. The silence of the room was no longer empty. It was the silence between moves. The silence of waiting for your opponent. My fingers left the cool, polished wood of the pawn. The click it made settling onto the new square was small, but in the silence of the penthouse, it sounded like a gavel. Final. An answer had been given. A line had been crossed, my own. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the board. My move was a simple, defensive one, a standard response to his aggressive opening, but it felt like the most reckless thing I'd ever done. I had spent my whole life learning to be invisible. A quiet presence, a pair of hands that tidied the world and then vanished. It was how I survived. It was how I kept my job, this good, steady job. And I had just announced myself. I had stepped out from behind the curtain. Leaving the suite was different this time. Closing the heavy door didn't feel like sealing a room I had cleaned. It was the sound of a door locking behind me. I walked down the long, hushed corridor, the plush carpet swallowing the sound of my sensible shoes. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I thought of Maria's warning. His comfort is the only thing that matters. I thought of the rent, of Michael's tuition, of the bills that come and never stop. What have you done, Linda? The question echoed with every step. He would see it. Of course he would see it. He had set the stage. He would come back to his quiet, perfect room and see my reply sitting there, my little piece of defiance. What would he do? A phone call to the front desk, a quiet word with management. The maid is touching my personal things. That's all it would take. I would be called into an office, my key card would be deactivated, and I would be escorted out a service exit. No scene, no drama. Just another invisible person made to disappear for good. That night, sleep was a shallow, restless thing. I kept seeing the chessboard in the dark, the stark black and white of it, a battlefield. I woke up the next morning with a knot of dread in my stomach. Getting dressed for work felt like putting on a uniform for a firing squad. The hotel was the same as always. The lobby smelled of lilies and money. The staff elevator hummed with the usual morning chatter. But for me, everything was sharp and loud. Every glance from a coworker felt like an accusation. Every time the phone rang at the housekeeping station, I flinched, certain it was the call for me. Maria found me by the linen closets. Parker. My stomach immediately tightened. This is it. Yes, Maria? I kept my voice steady, my eyes on the stacks of clean towels in front of me. The third floor is complaining about slow service on turndown. I need you to make sure your team is moving. We're the Grand Majestic, not a motel. Yes, Maria. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees weak. She didn't know. Nothing had happened. And remember what we talked about, she added, her voice dropping slightly. Professionalism. Especially with our high-value guest. She looked me right in the eye, that word again. Professionalism. A shield they used to hide behind. She wasn't warning me about him, she was warning me about me. Don't cause trouble, don't be a problem. I nodded. I understand. She gave a crisp nod and walked away, her clipboard held like a weapon. The relief soured. Nothing had happened yet. The silence from the penthouse was not a reprieve. It was a wait. He was letting me wait. He was letting me imagine all the things that could happen. The game wasn't just on the board anymore. It was everywhere. Finally, it was time. My cart was stocked, my nerves shredded. I pushed it down the 17th floor hallway. The silence was absolute up here. It was a different kind of quiet from the rest of the hotel, a heavy, expensive quiet, the quiet of power. I stood before the door to the penthouse for a full minute. My hand, holding the key card, was trembling. I had to force myself to lift it, to hear the soft electronic beep, the click of the lock releasing. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was still. The vast living room was immaculate, just as I had left it. Sunlight streamed through the floor to ceiling windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air. My eyes went straight to the small table by the armchair. The chessboard was there. I took a slow breath and walked toward it, my rubber-soled shoes making no sound. I felt like I was walking onto a stage, the spotlight fixed on me. I stopped a few feet away, my gaze locked on the board. He had made a move. His black knight now stood in a new position. An aggressive, predatory move that threatened my small pawn. It was a clear, calculated response. He was pleased. He had wanted me to play. A cold wave rolled through me, a mix of fear and a strange, unwelcome flicker of validation. He had seen me. But that wasn't all. Next to the chessboard, placed with perfect intention, was a small silver frame. It hadn't been there yesterday. My blood ran cold. I knew, even before I was close enough to see it clearly, that it was not his. It was for me. I took the last few steps, my body stiff with dread. It was a photograph, a candid shot of a young man with a familiar smile, laughing a backpack slung over his shoulder. He was standing on a green college lawn, a brick building with an archway visible behind him. It was Michael, my son. I had never seen this photograph before. It wasn't one I had taken. It wasn't one he had sent me. The angle was wrong. It was taken by someone standing at a distance, someone watching him. I stared at the image, at my son's happy, unsuspecting face. The air left my lungs in a rush. The vast, luxurious room suddenly felt like a cage. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with a threat so profound it was suffocating. This wasn't a game about a chessboard. It never was. The book about the execution, the white orchid, the chess game, they weren't random clues from an eccentric man. They were messages, they were tests. And I had just passed. I had shown him I was paying attention. I had shown him I was willing to engage, and this was my reward. This picture, a symbol of his reach, his power. He wasn't just in the hotel. He wasn't just in my workspace. He had reached across the city and into my life, into the one thing I cherished, the one person I worked so hard to protect. He had found my son. The word came back to me, not in Maria's voice, but in a low, chilling whisper inside my own head. Comfortable. Management said the millionaire felt comfortable with me. I finally understood what it meant. It was the comfort of a man who knows he has you trapped. The comfort of a collector who has finally acquired a new interesting specimen and can now begin to study it at his leisure. The photograph was not just a threat, it was a promise. It told me that the board was much larger than I had ever imagined, and we were already in the endgame. And my son, my beautiful boy, was now a piece in play. The world went silent. Not the heavy, waiting silence of Mr. Collins's suite, but a total absence of sound, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I could only hear the frantic beat of my own blood in my ears, a panic drum against my skull. It was a photograph of my son, my Michael. He was sitting on a bench, a book in his lap, squinting slightly against a sun I couldn't see. A small, self-conscious smile played on his lips, the one he gets when he thinks no one is looking. He was wearing the gray university sweatshirt I sent him for his birthday. It was a picture I had never seen before, a picture no one should have. The frame was heavy in my hands, silver and cold. It felt like a piece of a tombstone. My breath came back to me in a ragged gasp. My first thought wasn't a thought at all, but a feeling. The feeling of a hand closing around my throat. He had reached outside the hotel, outside the city. He had reached all the way to Michael's campus, 200 miles away, and he had taken this, a piece of my son's life. This wasn't a gift, it wasn't a message, it was a violation. It was a threat delivered in a silver frame, placed carefully on a polished nightstand for me to find. A reminder of what I had to lose, of what he could touch. My hands shook so badly I was afraid I would drop it. The glass would shatter. Evidence of my fear all over the floor. I had to get it out of sight. I looked around the vast empty room. It was a stage and I was the only one on it, a single spotlight on me. But I knew he was watching. He was always watching. I couldn't leave it here. Leaving it would be an acceptance, a surrender. It would tell him I understood the new rule. My son was now a pawn on the board, but I couldn't just take it. Taking things was the first rule you learn, the one that got you fired without a second thought. Theft. It would be my word against his, the word of a maid against the word of the man in the penthouse. There was no contest. It would put a target on my back. My mind raced. My cleaning cart was just outside the bedroom door. My sanctuary of professionalism, my tools, my supplies. With trembling fingers, I laid the frame face down on the nightstand. The velvet backing was black and soft. I took one of my clean folded microfiber cloths from my apron pocket. Carefully, I wrapped the frame in it, folding the corners like a precious, terrible gift. Another layer, then another. I didn't want to feel its sharp corners. I didn't want to risk seeing Michael's face again. The bundle was thick and rectangular in my hands. I clutched it to my stomach and walked, stiff-legged out of the bedroom. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every shadow in the long hallway of the suite seemed to move. The silence was alive now, filled with judgment. I placed the wrapped frame at the very bottom of my cart, hidden beneath spare rolls of toilet paper and a box of trash liners. It was a pathetic hiding place. a child's hiding place. I had to finish the room. That was the most insane part. I had to smooth the duvet. I had to wipe down the bathroom counters, polish the chrome faucets until they gleamed, empty the small wastebasket. My body went through the motions, but my mind was stuck on that bench with my son. Was someone watching him right now? Did he feel a chill on the back of his neck and not know why? The job had been my shield. The routine, my armor. Now it was just a cage, forcing me to stay in the room with this poison, this proof of his reach. I worked faster than I ever had in my life. My movements were jerky, desperate. Every minute spent in that suite felt like a minute I was failing to protect my son. Finally, it was done. I backed out of the suite, pulling my cart with me. The click of the heavy door locking behind me wasn't a sound of relief. It was the sound of a cell door closing, leaving the monster inside, knowing it could get out whenever it wanted. I didn't go to the service elevator. I went straight to Maria's office. I didn't know what I was going to say, only that the silence in my own head was too loud to bear. I needed to tell someone. I needed this to be real, to someone else besides me. I knocked once, a sharp rap of my knuckles. "Come in," her voice called, distracted. I pushed the door open. She was on the phone, nodding, a pen in her hand. "Yes, I understand. We'll make sure housekeeping is fully briefed. Client comfort is the priority, absolutely." That word again, comfortable. She hung up and looked at me, her smile tight and professional. "Linda, is everything all right? You look pale." "Maria, I need to talk to you about Mr. Collins." Her smile vanished. It was replaced by a look of tired impatience, the look of a manager dealing with a problem she thought was already solved. "We've been over this, Linda. He's an important guest. Your assignment is a sign of trust." "He left something in the room," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Something for me." "Another gift?" She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Linda, some high-value clients like to show their appreciation. It's unusual, but as long as it's within hotel policy." "It wasn't a gift," I interrupted, my voice gaining a raw edge. I reached for my cart, which I'd left just outside her door. "You need to see it." I fumbled for the bundle at the bottom of the cart, my fingers clumsy. I could feel her eyes on me, her disapproval radiating across the small office. "What are you doing with that in your cart?" she asked, her tone suddenly sharp, accusatory. "You know the rule. Nothing leaves a guest's room. Nothing." "I had to," I said, pulling out the cloth-wrapped frame. "Please, just look." I started to unwrap it, but she held up a hand, stopping me. "No," she said. The word was flat, an order. "Do not show me. If you have removed a guest's personal property from their suite, you have already committed a serious breach of protocol. I don't want to be a witness to it." I stared at her. She didn't want to see it. Seeing it would make it real. It would make her responsible. It was easier to pretend, easier to blame me. "It's a photograph," I choked out, tears finally welling in my eyes, "of my son." Maria's face hardened. "And how do you know it's for you? How do you know it's not a picture of his own family, and you're just mistaken?" "It's my son, Maria. I think I know my own son." "This is a very serious accusation," she said, her voice low and cold. "You are accusing a man, our most important long-term guest, of threatening you. You took property from his room. You are creating a situation that could be catastrophic for this hotel and for your employment." The threat was clear. Drop it or you're gone. The job, Michael's tuition, the rent that was due next week. It all flashed before my eyes. He had me trapped, and the hotel was holding the door shut. "He wants me to be scared," I whispered. "He wants me to know he can get to my family." "What he wants," Maria said, standing up, her authority absolute, "is a quiet, discreet, and professional service. The service you were assigned to give. Perhaps this is all a misunderstanding. A gesture of kindness that you are misinterpreting because you're under stress." She looked me up and down. "Go take your lunch break. Put the item back in the room, exactly where you found it, and we will never speak of this again. Do you understand me, Linda?" It wasn't a question. It was a command. I stood there for a moment, the heavy, cloth-wrapped frame in my hands. I looked at Maria's unyielding face, a face that cared more about a rich man's comfort than my son's safety. I understood perfectly. I was invisible, My fear was invisible. I nodded slowly, the motion feeling like it was tearing something in my neck. I couldn't speak. "Good," she said, sitting back down, already picking up her pen. Dismissed. I backed out of her office, pulling the cart behind me, but I didn't go to the service elevator. I didn't go back to the penthouse. I abandoned my cart in a linen closet on the 3rd floor and walked out of the hotel. The frame was tucked into my large handbag, a cold, hard weight against my hip. I didn't stop walking until I was home, in my small apartment. I locked the door, slid the chain across. Only then did I let myself breathe. I unwrapped the frame and set it on my little kitchen table. Michael's face looked up at me, that quiet, unknowing smile. I grabbed my phone, my fingers slipping on the screen. I dialed his number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring was an eternity of panic. "Hey, Mom," his voice said, cheerful and blessedly normal. "Everything okay?" "Yes, baby, everything's fine," I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. I wanted to hear your voice. How are classes?" "Good, yeah. Got a paper due on Friday, but it's mostly done. Are you eating okay?" He laughed, a sound so precious it hurt. "Yes, Mom, I'm eating. You worry too much." I closed my eyes. "I know. I'm sorry. Just be careful, okay?" "Careful? Of what?" "Just, in general, look out for yourself." "I will, Mom. I promise. Hey, I gotta run. My study group is waiting. Love you." "I love you too, Michael. So much." The line went dead. He was safe for now. He was okay. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, staring at the photograph. Maria was wrong. I couldn't put it back. This wasn't his property anymore. It was mine. It was the proof, the evidence, the opening move in a new, more terrible game. The chessboard in the suite was a diversion, a game within the game. I finally understood. The board wasn't the checkered squares in his room. The game wasn't in the penthouse anymore. It was everywhere. The automatic doors of the Grand Majestic slid open. The city air, thick with exhaust and the distant smell of street food, hit me like a physical blow. It was the air of my world, the real world, and it had never felt so foreign. I walked one foot in front of the other, my hand clenched around the photograph. The sharp corner of the silver frame dug into my palm. A small, steady pain. A reminder that this was real. I didn't take the bus. I couldn't stand the thought of being pressed in with other people, of their casual chatter, and the scrape of their bags against my legs. I needed the space. I needed to walk. The 10 blocks to my apartment building felt like a journey across a hostile country. Every person who glanced my way was an observer. Every car that slowed was a threat. It was his world now, and I was just living in it. My son, my Michael. The thought was a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I could feel its wings beating against my ribs. I had left the hotel, walked out on Maria's command, on my job, the one thing I had always protected. My steady, reliable job. The job that paid the rent and kept the lights on and helped with Michael's tuition. I had thrown it away, but when I looked down at the photo still clutched in my hand, I knew I hadn't had a choice. There was no job in the world worth this. My apartment building was old, the lobby smelling faintly of dust and bleach. It was nothing like the perfumed air of the Majestic, but it was home. It was my fortress. I fumbled with the keys, my hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the deadbolt to turn. The click of the lock sliding home was the sound of a cage door closing, but this time I was the one turning the key. I leaned my back against the door, breathing in the familiar scent of my own small life, lemon dish soap. Old books, the faint trace of the curry I'd made 2 nights ago. For a moment I just stood there in the dim light of the entryway. Safe. Then I looked at the photograph again. The safety evaporated. It was a lie. There were no walls high enough. I walked into the living room and sank onto my worn floral sofa. I placed the frame on the coffee table, propping it up against a stack of magazines. It looked obscene there, a piece of his world invading mine, a silver frame threat sitting next to a chipped mug. Under the warm glow of my reading lamp, the details were even sharper, more cruel. Michael was walking away from the campus library, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He was laughing, head turned towards someone just out of frame. The sun caught the side of his face. He looked happy. He looked safe. He was completely unaware. The person holding the camera was standing some distance away, partially obscured by the low-hanging branches of an old oak tree. The angle was deliberate. It wasn't a casual snapshot, it was surveillance. It was the work of someone who knew how to be invisible, someone who had waited for the perfect, unguarded moment, someone comfortable with watching from the shadows. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. He had been there, at Michael's school, breathing the same air. He had sent someone, or he had gone himself. It didn't matter which. The message was the same. I can reach outside this hotel. I can touch what you love. The chess game, the flower, the book, they were moves in a game confined to the penthouse. This was different. This was an escalation. He had taken the game off the board and brought it into my life. Maria's voice echoed in my head. You're misinterpreting. A sign of trust. Don't cause a problem. She didn't see a threat. She saw an important man, a high-value client. She saw money and prestige and a problem she wanted to go away. She saw a maid who was getting emotional. She didn't see the leash he was holding. This photograph was the leash. My hands went to my phone. I had to call him. I had to hear his voice. My thumb hovered over his name. Michael. What would I say? A rich man I clean for is playing a game with me, and he has a picture of you. He would think I was losing my mind. He would worry, and that was the one thing I could not allow. Worrying was my job, not his. His job was to study, to laugh with his friends, to be 20 years old. I pressed the call button. It rang twice before he picked up. Hey, Mom, everything okay? His voice was casual, distracted. I could hear music in the background. Hi, honey. Yes, everything's fine, I lied. The word felt like ash in my mouth. I was just thinking about you. How are classes? Good, good. Drowning in midterms, you know how it is? He chuckled. Is something wrong? You sound weird. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. No, nothing's wrong. I just wanted to tell you to be careful is all. Careful? The music in the background seemed to get a little quieter. Careful of what? I'm not going to any wild parties, I promise. No, not that. Just be aware of your surroundings, you know? Pay attention to who's around. Lock your door. My words felt flimsy, pointless. How do you tell your child to be on guard against a ghost? There was a pause. Mom, are you sure you're okay? This is a little random, even for you. I tried to laugh, but it came out as a choked little sound. I'm your mother. It's my job to be random and worry. Just humor me, okay? Maybe come home this weekend. I could make that lasagna you like. Come home where I can see you. Come home where I can keep you safe. This weekend, I can't. I've got that huge history project due Monday. Maybe next weekend, he said, his voice already moving on. Listen, I've got to run. Study group is starting. Love you. I love you too, Michael. Be safe. Always am, he said, and then the line went dead. I lowered the phone, the silence of my apartment rushing back in. He wasn't coming home. He was 100 miles away, living his life, completely oblivious. And I had no way to warn him without sounding like a crazy person. Mr. Collins knew that. It was part of the game. He had isolated me completely. I was trapped. Not in the hotel anymore. I was trapped in my own fear, in my own powerlessness. I stared at the photograph. He had moved his piece. A pawn. He had called Michael. A pawn taken from my side of the board and placed under his control. Now it was my move. Maria had given me an order. Put the picture back, pretend it never happened, and go back to being quiet, discreet Linda. Go back to being invisible, but I couldn't. He had seen me. He had looked right past the uniform and the cleaning cart, and he had seen me. He'd found the one thing in the world that I couldn't risk. For an hour I sat there. The sun went down, and the room grew dark around me. The only light coming from the street lamp outside my window, the silver frame gleamed. I thought about the police. What would I tell them? A rich man gave me a photo of my son. They would ask if he had threatened me, not in words. They would ask if he had harmed me, not physically. They would look at me, a hotel maid, and then they would think of him, a man who lived in the penthouse of the Grand Majestic. They would dismiss me just like Maria did. It would have put a target on my back for nothing. No, the system wouldn't help me. And Maria, the hotel, the police. They were all part of the world that protected men like Mr. Collins. They were the walls of the castle. I was on the outside, so what did I have? I had a key card that until tomorrow morning would still get me into the service elevator. I had a uniform folded in my closet, and I had knowledge. For weeks, I had been the only person allowed into his private space. I knew where he kept his papers. I knew he never locked the small desk in the study. I knew he sometimes left his laptop open. I had been trained to see nothing, to touch nothing, to be a ghost who left behind only the scent of lemon polish and clean sheets. I had learned to be invisible. It was time to use it. He thought this was his game. He set the board. He chose the pieces. But he made a mistake. He let me into his world. He had shown me his move, and now I could see the whole board. The game wasn't about chess. It was about power. And the only way to fight power like his wasn't to run from it or report it. It was to find a piece of it for myself. My fear was still there, a cold stone in my gut. But something else was stirring beside it, a cold, quiet anger. He had threatened my son. He had used Michael to make me feel small, to make me feel trapped. He had mistaken my silence for weakness. I stood up and walked into my bedroom. I pulled my work uniform from the closet. The crisp, gray fabric felt different in my hands now. It wasn't a symbol of servitude anymore. It was a costume. It was my way back inside. I would go back tomorrow. I would clock in like nothing happened. I would take my cart and ride the service elevator up to the penthouse. I would let myself in. And I would not be cleaning. I would be searching. The decision once made did not bring peace. It did not chase the fear away. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath my ribs, a constant companion. But something else was there now too, something hard and cold that had settled in my chest overnight. It was resolve. I woke up before my alarm, the gray light of dawn barely touching the window. For a moment, lying in the quiet of my small apartment, the night before felt like a bad dream. Maria's flat eyes, the weight of the framed photo in my bag, the word fired. But it wasn't a dream. The photo was on my nightstand, turned face down. I didn't need to see it. I could feel it there, an object radiating a quiet threat into the room. My routine was the same, coffee, a piece of toast I didn't want. But my movements were different, sharper. There was no hesitation. When I put on my uniform, the familiar gray and white fabric felt less like a costume for a maid and more like camouflage. My invisibility was no longer a shield for my own comfort. It was now a weapon. The bus ride was a blur. The faces around me were just shapes. Their conversations a distant noise. All I could see was the path ahead. A narrow, dark hallway with only one door at the end, the door to the penthouse. When I walked into the staff entrance of the Grand Majestic, the air was the same. The smell of industrial cleaner and yesterday's breakfast buffet. But I was different. I walked with my head high. I didn't look for friendly faces. I didn't need them anymore. Maria was at the desk, organizing key cards. She didn't look up when I clocked in. That was fine. Better even. I stood before her, waiting. Finally, her eyes flickered up to mine, then away, as if looking at me was too much effort. "He's out for the morning," she said. Her voice was flat. A warning, a dismissal. She had washed her hands of me. "A meeting downtown. He won't be back until after 1. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. It surprised me. She pushed the penthouse keycard across the counter without another word. The small piece of plastic felt heavy, like a stone. It was permission. It was a countdown. I had a few hours. The ride up in the private elevator was different today. Before, it had been a journey into a space of anxiety. Today, it was an ascent into enemy territory. The soft ding of the elevator arriving at the top floor was not a pleasant chime. It was the sound of a starting gun. I let myself into the suite. The silence hit me first, it always did. But today it wasn't the silence of an empty home. It was the silence of a vault, and I was there to crack it. My cleaning cart stood by the door, a prop. My real tools were my eyes, my hands, and the cold knot of resolve in my stomach. Where do you start when you're looking for a man's soul? I bypassed the living area, the pristine kitchen, the sterile guest rooms. My feet moved without my telling them to, taking me directly to his study. This was his space. The chessboard was there. The The pieces exactly as I had left them. The white orchid sat on the corner of the desk, its bloom perfect, almost fake, a mockery of life, my heart hammered against my ribs. He won't be back until after 1. The words echoed in my mind, a frantic mantra. I had time. I had to believe I had time. The desk was immaculate. A leather blotter, a pen stand, a single lamp, and his laptop, a slim silver machine, closed. It was the brain, the heart of the operation. Everything I needed to know had to be in there. I opened it, the screen lit up, showing a simple login prompt. It needed a password. Of course it did. A man like Collins, a man who built walls of silence and observation, would have a digital fortress. My hands trembled. What would it be? A name? A date? I knew nothing about him, nothing personal. My mind raced. What did he think was personal? What had he shared with me? The game. It was always about the game. I thought about the book he'd left, the passage he'd underlined about seeing the whole board. I thought about the chessboard, the invitation. His entire interaction with me was a series of moves, a calculated match. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed the first move he had ever taught me, the king's pawn opening, simple, classic, arrogant, E forwards. I pressed enter. For a second, nothing happened. My breath caught in my throat. I had failed. It was a stupid, desperate guess. Then the screen flickered and the desktop appeared. A plain gray background. No icons, except for a single folder in the center of the screen. I was in. My stomach lurched, a mix of terror and triumph. He had let me in. The password wasn't just a code, it was a message. You are part of the game now. You know the moves. The folder was labeled simply projects. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely control the trackpad. I double-clicked. A list of other folders appeared. They were not named with dates or project titles. They were named with names. There were 8 of them. 8 names, 8 women. Each folder was a headstone. My blood ran cold. I was not the first. I wasn't special. I was just the latest project. My eyes scanned the list, dreading what I knew I would find. And there it was at the bottom. Parker, L, 2023. I couldn't breathe. It felt like a physical blow to see my own name there, cataloged, filed away like a specimen, a project to be managed, to be broken. I had to know what was inside. I clicked on my name. The contents of the folder filled the screen. It was all there. A copy of my employment file from the hotel, detailing my work history, my attendance, my address. A report from a private investigator, a summary of my life, my finances, my debts. Michael's tuition schedule. It was a blueprint of my vulnerabilities. And then I saw the image file, the one he had printed and framed. The candid shot of Michael on his college campus, laughing with a friend. Completely unaware. Seeing it there, on Collins's private computer, felt like a deeper violation than seeing the physical photograph. It was clinical. It was data. My son was data. Beneath it was a document titled Profile. I open it. Subject, Linda Parker, age 46, widowed. 1 son, Michael, 21, student at Northwood University. Financial pressure moderate but consistent. Personality profile, risk-averse, diligent, non-confrontational. Values stability and predictability. Learned professional invisibility as a survival mechanism. Primary leverage, son's welfare and future prospects. I felt sick. He hadn't just observed me. He had studied me like an insect. He knew my pressure points before he ever started to press them. The word comfortable wasn't a compliment. It was a strategic assessment. He was comfortable because he knew he had me trapped before the game even began. A new wave of anger, white hot and pure, burned through the fear. This was my leverage. This was his pattern. This was the proof. I couldn't take the laptop, but I could take the files. In my work bag, tucked into a side pocket, was the small USB drive I always carried. It had photos of Michael on it from his last visit home. Family pictures, my world. I never went anywhere without it. My hands were slick with sweat as I plugged it into the side of the laptop. The drive appeared on the screen, an icon named Family. The irony was a punch to the gut. I dragged the entire projects folder onto the drive's icon. A small window popped up. Copying files. The progress bar moved so slowly it felt like it was going backward. Each percentage point was an eternity. My ears strained, listening for any sound from the hallway, the hum of the air conditioning, the distant city traffic, nothing. 30%. I looked at the names again. Amelia, Chloe, Isabel. What happened to them? Were they maids, secretaries, women he had cornered and collected, their fears cataloged in these neat little folders? Did they fight back, or did they just disappear? 60%. My job, my son, my quiet life. He had put a price on all of it and assumed I couldn't pay. He assumed I would be quiet, discreet. He had profiled me as non-confrontational. He was about to find out how wrong he was. 90%. I held my breath. The silence in the room was immense, a physical presence. Copy complete. I dragged the USB icon to the trash to eject it, my fingers fumbling. I pulled the small drive from the port and closed my fist around it. It was warm from the machine. It felt like a beating heart. Quickly, I cleared the computer's recent history, closed the folder and shut the lid. I wiped the laptop and the desk with my cleaning cloth, erasing any trace of my fingerprints. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I had it. I had the proof. I had a weapon. I turned to leave the study, my real work done. I grabbed the handle of my cleaning cart, ready to make a token effort in the living room before leaving, and then I heard it, a sound from the hall. Soft but unmistakable. The ding of the private elevator. My blood turned to ice. I looked at the clock on the wall. 11:32 a.m. He was early, an hour and a half early. The heavy suite door, the one I had come through, was on the other side of the main living area, too far. The only other doors in this part of the suite led to bedrooms, bathrooms, closets. There was nowhere to run. The lock on the main door clicked. I was trapped. Chapter 9. Chapter 9. The soft click of the suite door was not a sound of arrival. It was the sound of a lock engaging, the sound of a cage being shut. My blood went cold. My breath caught in my throat, a dry little knot of air. For a full second, I was paralyzed, my hand frozen on the mousepad. The progress bar on the screen had just vanished. Copy complete. A sound I had been dreading, the one I had gambled against. He was back. My hand, slick with sweat, pulled the USB drive from the port. The small black rectangle felt impossibly heavy, a damning piece of evidence. I didn't think. I just moved. My uniform pocket felt too obvious, the first place anyone would look. My cleaning cart was an eternity away, out in the living area. My gaze darted around the small masculine study. No loose floorboards, no hollow books. This was not a movie. This was real. Instinct took over. The same instinct that tells a mouse to freeze when the shadow of a hawk passes over. I fumbled with the top buttons of my uniform, my fingers clumsy and stupid. I slipped the drive inside my bra, tucking it between the cheap fabric and my skin. The plastic was cold, then immediately warm. A secret held close to my heart, a piece of ice pressed against a burn. I closed the laptop lid. The quiet snap echoed in the silence. It was an admission of guilt. Too late to pretend I was just dusting. My mind raced. He knows. He must know. The timing was too perfect. This was not chance. This was his move. Another piece slid across the board. I had two choices. I could cower in the study, wait for him to find me like a cornered animal, or I could walk out there. I had to walk out there. Invisibility was no longer an option. Now the only cover I had was my role. The maid. The one who was supposed to be here. I took a deep, shaky breath. I smoothed the front of my uniform. I picked up the feather duster from the desk, my hand gripping the handle so hard my knuckles were white. It was a prop, a flimsy shield. Entering that suite had felt like walking onto a stage. Walking out of this study felt like stepping into the spotlight without having learned my lines. Each step out of the study was deliberate, heavy. My shoes made no sound on the thick rug. The silence of the suite was different now. It was not empty. It was occupied. It was watching. He was not in the living area, not on the sofa. Then I saw him. He stood by the chess table, his back partially to me. He was perfectly still, dressed in the same dark trousers and crisp white shirt as always. He hadn't even taken off his jacket. It was as if he had walked in and come directly here, to the center of our game. He was waiting. He knew I was in the study. He had to have known. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird beating against the cage of my chest. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole through my skin. I forced myself to speak, to act. "Mr. Collins," I said. My voice sounded thin, a stranger's voice in the vast, quiet room. "I was just finishing up in the study." He did not turn around. Not at first. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He was making me wait. He was making me stand there, my pathetic duster in hand, my lie hanging in the air between us. Then slowly he turned. His face was calm, a blank mask of politeness. There was no anger in his eyes, no surprise. There was only a quiet, unnerving intensity, an appraisal. He looked at me, and I felt utterly seen. Not as a maid, not as part of the furniture. He saw me, Linda Parker, the woman who had just stolen his secrets. "Linda," he said, just my name. But the way he said it, so soft and deliberate, it sounded like a verdict. It confirmed everything. The game was real. The stakes were real, and I had just been caught. My mind scrambled for an excuse, another lie. I was dusting the laptop. I noticed it was open. But the words wouldn't come. My throat was closed tight. I knew it would be useless. He was too smart for such a simple deception. He would see right through it. Lying to him now would be an insult to his intelligence, and somehow that felt more dangerous than the truth. He took a step toward the chess table, his eyes never leaving mine. It was a strange, disconnected feeling. His body was moving, but his gaze held me pinned in place. "I was just dusting the board," I stammered, gesturing vaguely with the duster. It was the weakest thing I could have said. A flicker of something amusement maybe crossed his lips. It was gone as fast as it appeared. He looked down at the board, at the pieces exactly as I had left them after my last move. My knight, sitting bold and foolish in his territory. He reached down, his long, elegant fingers closing around his white queen. He did not look at the board as he moved it. His eyes were still on me. He slid the powerful piece across the squares, a clean, sharp sound on the polished wood. He placed it on a new square, a square from which it now aimed directly at my black king. He didn't say the word. He didn't have to. Check. The air left my lungs in a rush. It was a confession, a threat, a move and a counter-move all in one. He was telling me in our silent language that he knew. He knew I had been in his files. He knew I had made a move against him, and this was his response. He was putting my king, my most valuable piece, in immediate danger. He let his fingers linger on the queen for a moment, as if savoring the position. Then he looked up from the board, his expression unchanged, that same terrifying calm. "I trust your son is settling in well at school," he asked. The question was a physical blow. It hit me harder than a fist. The air was thin. The room felt like it was tilting. He had seen my move, the theft of his data, and he had raised the stakes from a photograph to a direct threat. He was reminding me what piece on the board my son represented. He was reminding me that his reach was long, and my king was exposed. I could not speak. I could only nod, a jerky, puppet-like motion. He gave a slight, satisfied nod of his own, as if I had given the correct answer to a simple question, as if we were discussing the weather. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was the calm of a man who held all the power, a man who felt so comfortable he didn't even need to raise his voice. "That will be all for today, Linda," he said. His voice was once again the voice of a guest dismissing the staff. Professional, distant. "You may go." He was letting me leave. He was letting me walk out of that suite with the USB drive pressed against my chest. He was not calling security. He was not yelling. He was letting me go. Because this was more interesting to him. The realization was a new kind of terror. This wasn't about stopping me. This was about playing the game. He had trapped me, confronted me, threatened my son, and now he was releasing me back into the wild, a tagged animal he could watch and hunt at his leisure. My freedom was not freedom. It was a longer leash. I turned, my legs feeling like wood. I did not run. I walked step by careful step toward the door. I could feel his eyes on my back the entire way. I did not look back. I put my duster back on my cart. I pushed it out into the hallway. The door to the penthouse clicked shut behind me. I stood there for a moment in the empty, carpeted hall. The silence here was different. It was a reprieve. I leaned against my cart, my forehead resting on the cool metal handle. My whole body was shaking. Not from fear of being caught anymore. It was the fear of what came next. He had let me leave with his secrets. He had let me leave with the weapon I thought would save me. The game hadn't ended. He had simply made his move, and now it was my turn again. Only this time, I knew the board was the entire world, and my son was a piece in play. The elevator doors slid shut. The quiet was a physical thing, a pressure in my ears after the humming tension of the penthouse. My hand was in my pocket, wrapped around the small, hard rectangle of the USB drive. It felt hot, like a coal plucked from a fire. It felt like evidence. It felt like a trap. I leaned my head against the cool, polished wall of the elevator. My reflection was a ghost in the brass, distorted and pale. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I had the data. I had the proof. And he had let me take it. He had let me go. The thought wasn't a relief. It was a new kind of terror. It was the move after check. It was the confident smile of a player who sees the entire board, not just the next step. Collins wasn't a man who made mistakes. He didn't have accidents. Letting me walk out of that suite with his secrets was a deliberate act, a calculation. The elevator chimed softly, announcing its arrival at the ground floor. The doors opened onto the familiar hushed grandeur of the main lobby. The scent of lilies and lemon polish, the distant murmur of conversation. To anyone watching, I was just a maid finishing a task. One of the invisibles. My training took over. My body knew the steps even if my mind was screaming. Head down, walk with purpose, avoid eye contact. I moved along the edge of the vast marble floor, a shadow hugging the wall. Every person I passed, a guest in a tailored suit, a concierge with a plastic smile, felt like a potential observer. One of his. The paranoia was a cold sweat on the back of my neck. He was a man of immense power. How far did his influence reach? Did it extend to the bellhop by the door? The security guard at the desk? It would have been so easy to run, to burst through the revolving doors and into the chaos of the city street. But I couldn't. I had a shift to finish. I had a uniform to return. Any deviation from my routine would be a red flag. He was watching for that, I was sure of it. He had given me a weapon and was now waiting to see how I would cut myself with it. I didn't go to the staff locker room. Not yet. I couldn't be around the casual chatter of the other women. The complaints about tips and tourists, their world was not my world anymore. I felt separated from them by a wall of glass. They were worried about paying rent. I was worried about a predator who had a picture of my son. Instead, I took a service corridor and descended a flight of concrete stairs into the hotel's belly. The air grew thick and hot, humming with the drone of machinery. I pushed through a heavy door and into the laundry. The noise was a physical blow. A dozen industrial-sized washers and dryers roared in unison. Steam billowed toward the low ceiling, carrying the chemical-clean smell of bleach and detergent. Workers in gray uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, feeding sheets into massive ironers, folding towels into perfect crisp stacks. It was loud and chaotic. It was perfect. Here, my silence wouldn't be noticed. My fear could hide in the steam. I found a corner behind a mountain of linen carts out of the main pathways. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them against the rough canvas of a laundry bag to steady them. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket. It was black and featureless, so small. It held the names of other women, Amelia, Chloe. It held proof of his sickness, his projects. And it was my son's death warrant if I used it wrong. The picture, the framed photograph of Michael, smiling, walking across the quad with his backpack slung over his shoulder. The image was burned into my mind. Collins hadn't just found him. He had taken the time to frame it, to place it on the table like a trophy, a warning. I can reach him. I can touch him. My phone was in my locker. I needed my phone. I stood up, forcing my legs to move. Back through the service corridors, up the stairs, my path a mirror of my descent. The locker room was almost empty, the end-of-day rush not yet begun. I fumbled with the lock, my fingers clumsy. Inside, next to my worn-out purse and a half-eaten granola bar, was my phone. I took it and walked back out, not daring to make the call from there. I found an empty supply closet on the third floor, a cramped space that smelled of ammonia and dust. I closed the door, plunging myself into near darkness. The only light was a thin sliver from under the door. My thumb hovered over Michael's name. My breath hitched. What if he didn't answer? What if something had already happened? The fear was irrational. Collins had just seen me. He wouldn't act that fast. His game was slow, psychological. But my fear wasn't rational. It was a mother's. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. "Hey, Mom." His voice normal, a little distracted. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees went weak. I slid down the wall to sit on a bucket. "Michael," I said, my own voice tight and strange. "You okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine. Just a long day." The light tasted like ash. "I just wanted to check in, see how you were." "I'm good. Drowning in midterms, but good. Professor Davies is a killer. He was talking about classes, about normal things. It was the most beautiful sound in the world." Is everything okay there, on campus?" "Yeah, why wouldn't it be?" A pause. "Mom, what's going on?" I had to be careful. I couldn't scare him. I couldn't let him know he was a pawn in something monstrous. "Nothing, honey. Just a mother worrying. You know how I get." I tried for a light laugh, but it came out like a cough. I want you to be careful, okay? Pay attention to your surroundings. Don't walk alone late at night." "I know, Mom. You tell me this all the time." He sounded impatient, the way sons do. "I've got to run. I'm meeting my study group. Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm sure," I lied again. "I love you, Michael." "Love you too, Mom. Talk later." The line went dead. The silence in the closet rushed back in, heavier than before. It was safe, for now. But the call had confirmed the bars of my cage. I couldn't tell him. I couldn't tell the police. Not without proof they would act immediately and protect him perfectly. And I knew that wasn't how the world worked for people like me, against people like Collins. He had insulated himself with my fear. I sat there in the dark, the phone in my lap, the USB drive clutched in my other hand. The trap was elegant in its cruelty. He had given me the means to destroy him, but he had chained it to the one thing I could never risk. My son. If I went to the authorities, he would know, and he would retaliate. He wasn't threatening to ruin Michael's life. He was threatening to end it. The book about the public execution wasn't just a metaphor. It was a promise. My shift was almost over. I had to go back. I had to punch out, change my clothes, and go home to my empty apartment. I had to pretend that my world hadn't shrunk to the size of a chessboard. Back in the locker room, I changed out of my uniform. I took a small roll of medical tape from my first aid kit. Carefully, I taped the USB drive to the underside of the metal shelf inside my locker, hiding it behind my lunchbox. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was the only one I had. I couldn't take it home. I couldn't keep it on me. It had to be separate from my life, even as it controlled it. As I closed the locker door, I caught my reflection in the small smudge mirror attached to it. The woman staring back was tired. Her eyes were wide with a fear that had settled deep into her bones. But there was something else there now too, something hard. The woman who had started her shift this morning, the one who just wanted to be invisible, was gone. In her place was someone who had been backed into a corner. Collins felt comfortable with me. That's what Maria had said. He was comfortable with my fear. He was comfortable with my powerlessness. He thought he had me trapped. I looked at my own trembling hands. He had made his move. He had taken the photograph, made the threat, and then let me go. He was waiting for me to panic, waiting for me to make a mistake. He hadn't just put me in check. He had taken the whole board and made it the size of my world. And it was my turn to move. The penthouse door clicked shut behind me. It was not a loud sound, but in the dead quiet of the hallway, it sounded like a vault being sealed. It was the sound of a door locking me out, but it felt like a door locking me in. My hand was in my pocket, clenched around the small, sharp rectangle of the USB drive. It felt hot, like a coal plucked from a fire. I walked toward the elevator, my legs stiff. Each step was a deliberate act, a command I had to give my own body. Left foot, right foot. Don't run. Don't look back. Be invisible. Check. The word echoed in my head. It wasn't just a move in a game. It was a statement, a promise. I see you. I see your son, and I can take him. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. I stepped inside, my reflection a pale, hollowed-out version of myself in the polished brass walls. The car descended, 32, 31, 30. With each floor, I felt like I was sinking deeper underwater, the pressure building in my ears, in my chest. He had let me leave. He had stood there, calm and still, and watched me walk out with his secrets. This was not a mistake. It was another move. He had given me the weapon knowing it was loaded and aimed right back at me. I bypassed the staff locker room. I couldn't face the chatter, the normal sounds of the end of a shift. I couldn't look Maria in the eye. Her words about professionalism, about trust, felt like a cruel joke from another lifetime. She was a part of the system that built this cage. She was one of the bars. I walked through the service corridors, the concrete tunnels beneath the hotel's opulent skin. Down here, there was no gold leaf, no crystal, just pipes and humming machinery and the smell of bleach. It was my world, the one I understood. But it didn't feel safe anymore. I felt watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a shape. Every hum of a generator sounded like a whisper. My first thought was Michael. A raw, primal panic seized me. I needed to hear his voice. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over his name, but I stopped. Collins had a picture of him. A picture on his college campus, miles away. How? Had he hired someone? Was someone watching him right now? If I called, would it trigger something? Would my call be the signal that put a target on my back, on his? My stomach twisted. He had made my own love for my son into a leash. I couldn't go home. My small apartment had always been my sanctuary, the one place I could breath. Now it felt compromised, tainted. He knew where I lived. He knew everything. I needed to see what was on the drive. I needed to know the full scope of the battlefield. The public library was a 10-block walk from the hotel. It was quiet. It was anonymous. It was a place full of strangers. And right then, there was no safer place to be. I found an empty computer carrel in the back, a small desk with privacy walls on 3 sides. It felt like a bunker. I slid the USB drive from my pocket. My hand was shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to push it into the port. A folder appeared on the screen. It was labeled Projects. My breath caught. I clicked on it. Inside were more folders, each named with a first name and a last initial. Amelia R., Chloe T., Isabel V., and 4 others. Then at the bottom, one that made my blood run cold. Linda P. I clicked on Amelia's folder first. I don't know why. Maybe it was easier than looking at my own. Inside were documents, a Word file titled Profile, a subfolder of photographs, a spreadsheet named Timeline. I opened the profile. It was written in a cold, detached language, the language of a lab report. Subject, para the Amelia R. Position, concierge, the Carlisle Hotel, the vulnerability, the student loan debt, 87,450. Single, estranged from family. Objective, establish dependency through financial leverage. Test loyalty and psychological resilience. Method, gradual escalation of gifts, anonymous payments toward debt. Intrusive observation, introduction of controlled stresses. Outcome, resignation from employment, May 12th. Relocated, no forwarding address. Subject ceased communication with all known contacts, terminated, the words was a punch to the gut. What did it mean? Fired or something else? The cold finality of it scared me more than any threat. I clicked on the photo folder. Pictures of a young woman with bright, hopeful eyes. At first, she was smiling. Pictures of her at her concierge desk, laughing with a friend in a park. Then the photos changed. They were taken from a distance, through a window. Her face was strained. She was alone. The last photo was blurry, a shot of her getting into a taxi at night, her face hidden. I felt sick. I closed her folder and clicked on the next one. Chloe T., a different hotel, a different city. Subject, Chloe T. Position, sommelier, 4 Seasons Boston. Vulnerability, custody battle for her 6-year-old daughter, history of anxiety. Objective, test response to manufactured legal and social pressure. Outcome: lost custody, voluntary commitment to psychiatric facility, terminated. It was a blueprint for ruining a life, a step-by-step guide. Each woman was a project, a game. He found their deepest fear, the thing that kept them up at night: debt, a child, a past mistake, and he pressed on it. He squeezed until they broke. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I had to look. I had to know what he had on me. I moved the cursor and clicked on Linda P. The same structure: profile, photos, timeline. I opened the profile. Subject: Linda Parker. Position: housekeeper, the Grand Majestic Hotel. Vulnerability: son, Michael Parker, age 19. Sole provider, high value placed on stability and employment, risk averse. Objective: test loyalty and obedience under psychological duress. Measure breaking point when core vulnerability is threatened. Method: establish exclusive access, the comfortable request. Gradual introduction of psychological artifacts, book orchid, chessboard. Direct threat escalation, photograph of son. Outcome: the space after outcome was blank, a blinking cursor, waiting. He was writing my story as it happened. I opened the photo folder. There were pictures of me I didn't know existed. Me walking to the bus stop, my face tired. Me in the grocery store, looking at prices. Me through my own apartment window one evening, watching television. He had been watching me for weeks. I had prided myself on being invisible, but I had been the most visible person in the world to him. I just hadn't known who was looking. And then there were the pictures of Michael. Not just the one from the frame, dozens of them. Michael walking to class, Michael studying in the campus library, Michael eating with friends in the cafeteria. My boy, my beautiful, happy boy, completely unaware of the shadow hanging over him. Over us. I closed my eyes. The sterile, quiet library felt like it was closing in on me. The air was thick. I couldn't breathe. This was the trap. This information wasn't leverage. It was proof that he was untouchable. If I went to the police, what would I say? That a rich man had pictures of my son? That he left a book in his own room? He would say I was a disgruntled maid who stole his private files. He had his story. I had mine. And he was an important man, a man management felt comfortable with. Who would they believe? I had a steady job. Rent to pay, bills that come no matter what. And a son whose safety was everything. Collins knew it. He had studied it. He had put it all in a file. I stared at the blinking cursor under the word outcome. It was a question. What will you do now, Linda? He was waiting for my next move. He expected me to freeze, to break, to resign, relocate, disappear, to become another closed case, another terminated. A cold anger began to smolder beneath the fear. It was a slow burn, deep in my gut. He had taken my life, my son's life, and turned it into a project, a game of chess. He had put me in check. But the game wasn't over. He thought these files were a cage, a display of his power to paralyze me. He was wrong. They were a map. He had given me the names of the other women, Amelia, Chloe, Isabel. He thought they were trophies, proof of his victories. But they weren't just names in a file. They were real people. He had broken them, one by one, in isolation. He had made sure they were alone. I looked at the screen, at the list of folders. He never expected the pieces to find each other. I saved a copy of the files to a secure cloud storage account under a fake name. Then I dragged the folder on the library computer to the trash and emptied it. I wiped the history. I pulled the USB drive from the port. It was just a piece of plastic and metal again. The heat was gone. In its place was a cold, hard weight. The weight of a purpose. I stood up and walked out of the library, blinking in the late afternoon sun. The city felt different. It was no longer just a place of work and worry. It was a board full of players who didn't even know they were in a game. My name was Linda P. My vulnerability was my son. My objective was no longer just to survive. It was to find the others.